All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am Kimberly Powell. I'm our Chief of Internship and Fellowship Programs here at the Library of Congress, and we are ready to begin our program. So I don't know about your commute this morning, but mine was just beautiful. I get a chance to take the commuter train in, and I get a chance to look out. And as I commuted in, I thought about how beautiful DC is at this time of the year. We do springtime a little differently here in DC because of those lovely treasures we have. And everything is vibrant and blooming. Springtime is also graduation season, and our friends, like our partners at Howard University and other universities around the country, are preparing for graduation. Well, we here at the Library of Congress have been preparing for a graduation of sorts with today's program. We are thrilled that each of you has been able to make it with us here this morning to celebrate our amazing 3 interns. Many of us, I have to tell you, interns are wondering how quickly this happened. I remember very well back in February, we were just introducing you to the library and taking that first photograph, and here we are today. We quickly also learned that these students are bright, they are talented, they are courageous, they are generous, and you all have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about all of that during the balance of this hour. So the time has come for us to reflect on the impact and the accomplishments of our inaugural Archives, History, and Heritage Advanced Internship Program, and welcome to this, our first reflection program. So interns, these are exciting times at the library, and you all have contributed significantly to our mission during your short time with us. We sincerely hope that your internship has been meaningful, that it's been gratifying, thought-provoking, and yes, challenging. We hope that you have a better sense of the rich and diverse collections we have here at the Library of Congress. We hope you understand better how we organize and preserve and make accessible our tremendous treasures. We hope that you have connected with our staff members. They are talented and they are committed to your growth and development. We also hope that your research skills have been further honed and that you will come back and bring faculty members, other students, family, and friends to access the Library of Congress and utilize its treasures. We also expect that you'll be able to navigate our collections like the expert scholars that you are. And lastly, but not leastly, we would hope that your association with the Library of Congress is an enduring one. Today is not an ending. It's the beginning of the continuous relationship that we'll have with you. And I just have to tell each of you, I really appreciate this opportunity, having gotten to know you and work with you. I am amazed, and I can't wait to hear more during our program about some of the things that you've done and how you've grown as a result of this great work we've done here. And so that said, it has been our great pleasure to work with and learn with each of you. And at this point, with all of that said, I'm going to have the great opportunity to introduce our 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
A great opportunity. Well, good morning. And when Kimberly said great opportunity, I said you couldn't have kept me away with anything because this program is dear to my heart. As someone who was born on the campus of an HBCU, who has also been privy to the fact that so much history of people of color is sometimes lost, misplaced, and not made accessible. The opportunity to have interns from Howard University to learn about what opportunities there are in archival professions. I just caught their attention. I should tell all the adults here, and they're young adults, that, for instance, Beyonce has a full-time archivist. That there are many, many ways to think about history and archives. And our collaboration is called Archives, History, and Heritage Advanced Internship. But it's also known as AHA. And it took me a minute to put all that together, but that's what it is, the aha of being able to make materials accessible, to open up a treasure chest and be the person that is going to find that letter, that is going to find that film clip, that is going to find that recording of Bessie Smith or whoever it is and make it accessible is one of the greatest gifts that you could give to the nation and the world and generations to come. This would not have been possible, though, without the generous support of two people who I have the pleasure of working with. They are members of the library's philanthropic arm, the James Madison Council. And at first, when I talked to Mr. Craig and Diane Wellborn, they said, Carla, what do you mean? Paid internships, African American history? Well, I don't know. But then, as soon as they said that, they said yes. And so I just want everyone to please give the Wellborns a hand. Because their relationship with the Library of Congress started because of their interest in history and making sure that history was accessible. And so their support has made this possible. So with each of the interns, they're going to talk about what they learned and what they did. But we just want to tell you all three of you, that this is now a place for you to consider home. The staff members that you've worked with, and I just saw Dr. Sybil Moses just come in, who has been saying, what is the original research they're going to be doing and all of this. So you have now people that will be following you and nudging you and just keeping up, but you have that support at the Library of Congress. So welcome.
Which mic is it? Okay. Hello, welcome. I wanted to first say thank you to Dr. Hayden, the Wellborns, and my family and mentors for coming here today. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to be here. So my name is Jacqueline Finn, and I'm a senior psychology major, graduating soon from Howard University. The project that I was assigned to this internship period was the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. And to introduce the company a little bit, Alvin Ailey is it was named by Congress as the official cultural ambassador to the world. And while I am a psychology major, so I originally wasn't interested in dance, I did know the importance of archiving Black culture. And knew that it was important to have Black people part of that movement and part of archiving Black history and culture. And so, sorry, a little nervous. To go ahead and introduce the collection, I wanted to start with the question that I was tasked with answering once I first got here. So the question was, what is in here and why is it important? What is in the Alvin Ailey collection? Why is it important to researchers, to academics, to students everywhere? So what I first started with was finding context. In order to contextualize the company, I thought it was important to look into the time period that we began in, that the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater began, the 50s and 60s, and what that looked like for America and for Black history and culture. And that guided, thank you. that guided my goals throughout the rest of the internship period. So the first picture at the top is from the very famous and the very well-known work, Revelations. And it shows this image of, Revelations is about a journey of spirituality and archives how Black people have grappled with our past in the country through our spiritual time in church. This is, of course, in the Alvin Ailey archives. The second picture is from Night Creatures, which is a performance that I saw at the Kennedy Center. And then the third picture is actually from our collection from the programs section. So I wanted to bring this up because I wanted to point out that that the company actually started as the De Lavalade Ailey company. And to me, what that said was the company was at first named with Carmen de Lavalade because she was more famous than Ailey. So as a message to artists everywhere, you might not start as the headliner, but but of course, Ailey's company is now 60 years old, has the Ailey American Dance Theater, the Ailey School, the Ailey Extension, and provides free dance lessons to the public beyond his death in 1989. And so the importance of going and getting started with whatever resources you have very much touched upon me from the jump. And so now to introduce the collection a little bit more, I touched upon what the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater is. And so as far as what's in the collection, there are moving images, diaries, scrapbooks, photos, correspondence. So while originally I thought I'd just be looking at videos of people dancing all day, I found much more information and much more that was relevant to what I wanted to bring out of it. So the first picture is again from one of the early works of Revelations, and there's Alvin Ailey in the picture, along with Ella Thompson Moore and Myrna White. The second picture is from the production of Roots, which Alvin Ailey put together to commemorate Black history and culture. And I thought it was interesting to look at because in the very top you can see that it says jazz is a heartbeat, jazz is a moving song or something like that. And then he just crosses it out and leaves it out of all the rest of the productions. And so seeing that kind of artistic process and the time it takes to produce something like a Revelations or produce something like a Roots that lasts through time, having the persistence to work through that artistic process, I thought was also important. To move a little bit into the presentations and tours.
I just need to move the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I started with the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, of course, but as I was going into his archives, I realized that his collection was only part of the story. So to talk about Black dance, and of course Black American dance, you have to talk about Katherine Dunham, who's the matriarch of Black dance. She was a cultural anthropologist and got her PhD, and was also the owner of a dance company, the Katherine Dunham Dance Company. Alvin Ailey, I'm sorry? Oh, yes. So my first week that I was here at the library, we actually had the opportunity to present to the Ailey dancers. So they came in around this room. We were showing them all these different artifacts, showing them pictures of Ailey. And we thought, oh, they'll be really interested in these old photos of Ailey because they've never seen them before. But it turns out they were much more interested by the Katherine Dunham FBI file. And I thought that was important to bring up because this is a woman who was a cultural ambassador of the U.S., again, had her PhD, was a Black American dance owner, but she had this really, and you can see it come to the collections, it's this really heavy stack of FBI files, her digging into her personal life. And so thinking about how dancers, especially Black dancers, have always assumed a political role and have been targeted in different ways for that. And so for us thinking in the future about what that means as we archive Black history and culture. And thanks to Mitch, one of our other librarians, I actually also uncovered a photo of John Leon Destiné. And so while Alvin Ailey is America's culture ambassador, he's Haiti's culture ambassador. And his work served to destigmatize voodoo, the African religion of Haiti. But of course I wouldn't have found that or came upon that unless I had started with Alvin Ailey or had the help of the librarians. And so as it comes to curating materials, I found it important to be able to put into context to put in historical and cultural context the development of Black dance. So again, to touch on the library resources, again, before I had started this internship, I wasn't super familiar with the library. But since coming here and since spending a couple weeks with the staff, I found particularly helpful was the library staff. So when navigating the reading room, the reference, and talking to the reference librarians, they were the ones who helped me put up my first blog post introducing the Alvin Ailey collection. And as we went on the tours of the different divisions, being able to see how different, this helped me realize how different materials would be archived. So while of course I initially kind of assumed, oh, music division, it's gonna have everything Alvin Ailey, realized that that's not to be true, and that's not always the most effective way to archive different materials. So having different means of preserving moving images versus music versus the sheets is all part of this way that we preserve American history. I also had the opportunity to stop at a pop-up panel called the Performing Black Womanhood, run by one of the Kluge Fellows. And there you could actually see this big slave trade map, and it documented the different ships that were coming during the slave trade, which I thought was very timely because it's the 400-year of return since the first African-American slaves came to the country. And so being able to see that and kind of think about where we are, but also where we have to go in terms of Black history and culture and how we tie it in with American history was, I think, an important thing to consider. How am I on time? Okay. As I was looking into the collection, I found a couple of ongoing issues that I thought were important to keep considering. So one was this idea of the psychology of the Black experience, which was a course that I took at Howard, but of course something that I kept thinking about as I was returning to this work. And it's kind of debated this idea that there is a Black experience, but for me, I thought it was important to continue looking into it because even if I was reading a correspondence between Alvin Ailey and one of his dancers, there's this idea that African Americans and that Black descendants pass on information in certain ways, or are more rhythmic, use more oral traditions, and use more movement. And so to see that on its different levels, I thought was important to keep considering. Also in this letter, this was a fan of Alvin Ailey's that wrote to him, Joan Goldstein, and she basically presents him with this really interesting query, which talks about Franz Kafka and how he was a famous writer who wanted all his works burned upon his death. Very dramatic. And so she writes to Alvin Ailey and asks him, what would you do if you were Franz Kafka, and would you have axed that upon other people? And so this made me think of that idea of individual expression versus collective need. So Alvin Ailey had an integrated dance company at a time when there was this whole Black Power movement, and one could argue that the community called or kind of axed upon him for certain things, and different artists decided to respond to that call in different ways. And so it just made me think of that idea about how much a person owes to their community and to preserving their materials for others to see versus how much they owe to their self and preserving their artistic need and artistic vision. Oh. And also thinking, of course, about how the arts are always connected to policies and politics, especially once we looked at artists like Nina Simone and Max Roach throughout the collections, and then bringing up this idea of uncomfortable conversations, which really just touches upon this idea that as archivists and as researchers, as academics, being able to talk about the uncomfortable parts of collections. So we did find blackface in the Caldwell collection, and which I also thought was timely because of what's been going on in the media lately. But so again, thinking about who is archiving and who is preserving these materials and how we're telling these stories. So kind of in the end, my lessons learned were research takes a significant amount of initiative and a significant amount of understanding who you're talking to at a given time. So while in the beginning, I had kind of very little context to run with, I did learn that on any level, you can, as a researcher, try to be a leader. And so with our music division tour, that was where I had the opportunity to lead part of it, bring out different parts of the collection, and tell a story. And then to end this off, while at first, again, I didn't see myself and my work as trying to go into clinical work as being relevant to this, I realized that having a multidisciplinary lens and bringing that to the work of archiving and to the work of research is necessary, because again, it's this idea as archivists, as librarians, we're telling a story and we're deciding how that story is told and remembered. And so thinking about that as we move into the future. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm Libby Spiegel, who was Jacqueline Chin's mentor in the music division. I'm the dance specialist here. And I hope that her report gave you a small glimpse into the kind of excitement that she brought to me especially, but to the whole music division, by having this opportunity to have someone who didn't just care about where Ailey's feet were, which I think is extraordinarily important. And while I have taught dance and have a background in academe, for me, having this monumental collection, which keeps on giving because the company continues to send us materials, I had been thinking that the way into this collection was someone who wasn't a dance person or even in performing arts. And when she was telling me, when we interviewed her about her course, Psychology of the Black Experience, I was like, this is the person. This is the person who's open enough to not know much at all, except through her dance friends, that Ailey was a great artist and extraordinary and jumped high and all of those things, but that in fact this was going to be a source of some significance. And I believe that she certainly refreshed me, and we have come back to this collection with newfound excitement. And what she also did was not just stick with the Ailey Company materials, but had that curiosity to make connections across collections that sometimes we, as the librarians or the archivists, don't have time to find. And it's giving me that sense of hypertexting our collections in a way that I think is going to be really exciting. And I thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Wellborn, for what you have offered in this experience, because it was a dream come true for me, and I think it's going to continue. So our next person, our next intern, intern, is Brittany Meaders, who was had her position at the American Folklife Center.
Hello, my name is Brittany Meaders. I'm a master candidate in classical voice and international affairs at Howard University, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. This spring semester, I had the tremendous opportunity of working in the American Folklife Center. I worked with 2 collections, the Bruce Jackson and Diane Christian collection and the Pete Walden collection. Today, I will talk about the collections in detail, my responsibilities, as well as my reflections with the enrichment programs that I attended. So my responsibilities with the Bruce Jackson collection included rehousing materials. It's important to rehouse documents to keep them from fading, from tearing, basically any damage. This was a great developmental task for me because I did not have previous knowledge at all with archiving documents and rehousing materials. With this responsibility, I also created a container list online that will be used for finding aid for researchers. Oh, and I'd like to go back. In this photo, you see a film and a film container. This was dated March 1974, and it features poker games and telephone talk. So there were some interesting findings with this collection. There were some taboo jokes that were often dark, as well as some prison environment and relationships. I also viewed some interviews and performances that they gave. This first joke on here says, it's okay for a priest to kiss nuns, but don't get in the habit. One chased a priest around the church and caught him by the organ. Here's a photograph of a list of songs that some of the prisoners composed while they were in prison. The first one is by Thomas Pollock, titled "I Got Stripes Around My Shoulder." It was written in 1965. I assume he's talking about the prison wear stripes that he had to wear. The second collection I worked with was the Pete Walden collection. It consists of over 700 extensive audio recordings of oral history. So these are interviews and performances from jazz and blues, ragtime performers. Pete Walden himself was an American archivist, historian, and producer. He specialized in jazz and blues music. Some of the interviews and performances I looked at was from Howlin' Wolf, Thomas A. Dorsey. These were prominent musicians in the 1960s and the 1970s. My responsibilities for these included listening and logging to the audio recordings. I logged over 90 of those. This required precise descriptions of the musicians' relationships, their music, and their career. I actually had the opportunity to attend an archives forum discussion here at the library, which talked about exploring archival relationships. So basically with that, I learned of the importance of including the lineage of relationships of musicians' teachers and mentors, and all of that's important to include in the audio logs, because the decision I make in including that information determines how easy it is for this to be used as a finding aid in the future. With this collection, there were also some interesting findings. As a professional musician myself, I really enjoyed listening to the audio. The first interesting finding was a 6-part concert series with Johnny Otis. He was an American musician, composer, producer, and talent scout. He often featured new talent on his radio show. And I appreciate the Johnny Otis recordings because he was adamant about giving new musicians a chance to be recognized, which I also think Pete Walden did with his interviews and performances by giving these musicians a chance for their voices to be heard and also to be preserved. My favorite interview was an in-depth 4-part interview with Pete Robinson. He was a jazz band musician for a band called Contraband. He told his story of his personal journey from classical music to pop music, which I also related to as a musician because I also started in classical music, learned the technical aspects of it, found my way with it, and learned also about pop music. So with this next slide, I've included 2 audio recordings. The first is from Robert Wilkins. He's a blues musician. And in this clip, he talks about the importance of what makes a blues song actually a blues song. And you'll hear him explain it's the inward feeling that you have and the sadness that you experience that is transposed into song. I think there's audio from me. Should I exit out of this? Yeah, there's that's not part of it though.
Is the same running Walden video? Did you exit out of that?
Oh, okay. I was like, that's not part of the audio. Okay, so now we'll hear the audio from Robert Wilkins.
That was in honor of Earth Day.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought that was great to include in the presentation because it gives you insight to what a composer felt and the audio that I listened to as I was working on this collection. The second clip is from Big Joe Turner. He's the musician pictured on the right. He was a blues jazz musician. In this, you'll get to hear a little bit of his song titled Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
Let's get the show started with a bang as we present one of the great old blues pioneers. He's known as the boss of the blues. He is the boss of the blues. Ladies and gentlemen, Big Joe Turner. One is the right one.
Okay. And then on the left here is a song list from the Johnny Otis show of just some of the performances that they did at the Ash Grove in LA. So I use this in correspondence with the audio. I would use this as part of my audio logs. The big part of my internship here was attending the cultural enrichment activities. I attended the events at the music division, the manuscript division, and the AFC, American Folklife Center. At the manuscript division, it was a privilege to view the personal diaries of the presidents and their first ladies. During the folklife presentation, I learned that folklife is the context surrounding the material and the creative intent. And at the music division, I was exposed to musical scores, literature and music analysis, which was really great for me to see, especially as a musician. I also attended several lectures at the library. Attended the African American Passages, Black Lives in the 19th Century. It was conducted by Jesse J. Holland, he's the journalist and novelist of the Black Panther, as well as Black Men Built the Capitol. He discussed the importance of presidential manuscripts being digitized so everyone can have access to it, and not just researchers and historians, but US citizens. I also attended a lecture on the polarization and political discourse in the US. They pinpoint the beginning of political discourse around 1964, the Civil Rights Movement. So I thought it was essential for me to go to these events because I learned more about Black culture, the Civil Rights Museum, and my history. At the beginning of the semester, I attended the new acquisitions display of the 100 of the library's finds of 2018. I conversed with the Near East section leader. She showed me her pictures of the Silk Road that she took and compared them to the model there. So just being able to network with people at the library was a great opportunity. I went to the Exploring the Early Americas exposition. I learned interesting information there about the Aztecs and the Mayans. And then the picture here, The Strange Fruit from Nina Simone, I got from the music division. That piece was revolutionary in itself, with racism and the lynching going on to African Americans. And so again, those events were important for me to attend as a Black person, and also to support my Black culture. So connection to the future, I plan on continuing a role in cultural diplomacy. I love to be an advocate for performing arts and have an impact, in the impact that they have on diverse cultures, and promote mutual understanding. The library helped me advance this by first giving me experience working in a federal government. The job that I'll be doing requires government work. I experienced firsthand materials in the American Folklife Center working with diverse cultures. I mean, there's no other better place that I could have been to learn that. And I also experienced a holistic approach with the enrichment activities. I attended things with about politics, about Black culture, about music, literature. All of these things were intertwined in my internship here. So I sincerely thank everyone who had a part in making this internship possible. The value and knowledge I gained and my overall experience here at the library has been unforgettable. Thank you for hearing me speak today. And now my mentor, Ann Hogue from the American Folklife Center, will be coming up.
Thanks, Brittany. That was great. That was great. I'm Ann Hogue. I'm a folklife specialist at the American Folklife Center. I have a little speech. I just want to, there was one thing, Dr. Hayden, you mentioned at the beginning about the Beyonce archives. Just this morning, I got an email from a former intern at the American Folklife Center. She interned probably 3 or 4 years ago in the processing section, and she was looking to see if I could provide a reference for her for a job that she was applying to. And I was looking at the job she was applying to, and it said the National Stock Exchange Archives. I was reading and I was like, oh, she's going to work for the New York Stock Exchange. No, she's working for the New York Stock Exchange archives. The archives, they're out there everywhere, even on Wall Street. Anyway, working with these unpublished ethnographic collections at AFC can prove to be very challenging in providing access to its content. Materials often come with minimal description, often handwritten notes scrawled on audio tape boxes, which were often done at the time of the recording and are full of abbreviations and incomplete and inaccurate descriptions. These artifacts, the tape boxes, are also not easily discoverable on their own, except by looking at the actual box. One of the tremendous results of Brittany's work was to make the content of these audio tapes discoverable by creating audio logs full of rich information, including the dates of the interviews, names of the musicians, place names, and song titles. This work can often be tedious. I think Brittany listened to more than 90 interviews in this collection, wearing headphones for hours and hours. It's Brittany. But there is a great reward. not only for the library now having rich descriptive content and being able to provide immeasurable assistance to the public wishing to learn more about this collection, but for Brittany herself with her graduate studies in music and international affairs. International affairs, these archival collections intersecting these same worlds of the humanities and social sciences, that of musical performance and the stories behind the music, the musicians, and the worlds from which those traditions emerged. So I now have the pleasure of introducing our next Howard University intern, Ife Adeneyi.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Good. Nice to see everyone. I want to say thank you to the Library of Congress, to everybody who played a part in giving us the opportunity to be a part of this initiative. My name is Kishad Adeni. I go by Ife. I'm a first-year doctoral candidate at Howard University. And I was given the opportunity to apply to this particular internship because of my chair at Howard University, who found a way to make it here, Dr. Nikki Taylor. And we were discussing my research. Currently, my research focuses on the experience of Black people traversing into Union territory during the Civil War, what we understand to be contraband. And I come into the work as an activist who's done a lot of work inside of carceral facilities, domestically, internationally, on all levels. And it's the lens in which I look at the experiences of Black people who are fighting on behalf of the Union Army, some who were impressed into the Union Army. And we were speaking about how critical it is for me to be sound as an archivist, as someone going into archives. And this opportunity came about, and so I reached out and I applied accordingly, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. The experience thus far has taught me on many levels how to go about reading and understanding how things are being compiled, finding aids and how to search through and sniff through information. And I've been given the task to look at Anthony Hill, who was critical to the National Urban League and their development as an organization. She was born in 1906 in Boston, Massachusetts. And she began working with the organization as early as 1928, the local organization in Springfield, Massachusetts, and moved to the national headquarters in about, I think, 1931. What you see on the screen right now is a quote from Anthony Hill where it says, it was not until I learned of the National Urban League that I learned of Negro history, and that I became proud of my race and became conscious of being a Negro. I think this quote really highlights how she was thinking of herself, how she understood her work as an activist with the National Urban League. That quote is from a speech that she gave at the tail end of her life on her experiences as a leader who traversed through that specific organization. She comes from a background, a family of people who seem to be interested in the experiences and undercutting the Black plights that Black people are dealing with from the start. And for her, she moved through the educational system. She got her degree from Simmons College. And then as she moved in the National Urban League, she got a master's degree in vocational guidance at Columbia University Teachers College. And this really helped to move her along this really helped to impact her trajectory within the National Urban League, where she would become the vocational guidance director, which I think is one of the more explicit, or one of the more, what I would say is what she'll be remembered by the most as it relates to her work within the National Urban League. For those of you who don't know, the National Urban League is an activist organization that helped to support and undercut the Black plights of Black people generationally. Anthony Hill was working, I guess, in contention with the Great Migration, right? Black people fleeing from the South, they're running from the terror of Jim Crow, and they're looking to find out how they can help black people as they get into these new areas, specifically around job placement, education. And Anthony Hill was very passionate about this. She does the work for decades. And even after her retirement in 1971, she continued her efforts to work alongside the National Urban League to try to help black people, specifically black youth. And I think that's where I connected with her the most. As stated, a lot of my activist work has also been with black youth. Black youth who are implicated under the law, black youth who are in prison or who are incarcerated. And so I find that work to be important because our youth are very critical to how we're thinking about the future. They're very critical about how we're impacting the future. And so I was impressed by that as it related to Anthony Hill, her commitment and dedication, and it just reminded me that it's something that I need to be steadfast in, and something that I should remain focused on. Her writings, I feel like were very exemplary of who she was as a person. The personal papers of Anthony Hill is comprised of speeches, proposals, scripts, reviews. But I think another way to understand Anthony Hill is that she was also a scholar. When she got material, she read through them with fine, very detailed, very, very interested in how she could help evoke her understanding of the work. I was reading a speech by her where she stated, to keep the proper perspective, I used the word Negro, which to me meant that she understood and very much so like the implications of her race and what that meant to her as an activist, even at the latter part of her career. And that's dear to me also because I am a writer, I'm a poet. And I think when we use that work as a way to continue to mobilize, I think it strengthens our scope. And it seemed to be very clear for Anthony Hill to be detailed around that. Another part of the Anthony Hill papers is the family papers, which was comprised of a lot of good information that I think researchers would be interested in. More importantly, the Golden Rule Club, which is an organization spearheaded by her mother at some point. Her older sister also was a president of this organization, and Anthony Hill also followed suit. And it was an organization that looked to help black people in the Massachusetts area. And I found that to be important because I think it speaks to the impetus behind her work with the National Urban League. I think it explains why she's coming into the work the way that she is. She's also the granddaughter of William Grayson, who was a self-emancipated ex-slave. And I thought that was critical also. Lastly, which was the highlight for me, was how Anthony Hill was thinking about activism, which is critical to me, as you hear in my thread of explaining Anthony Hill. For her, activism moved beyond this tangible idea. She was very much so interested in what archiving meant to activism and preserving the history. And that's not something that I guess I really understood until coming into Howard University as a historian and understanding it on a fundamental and intimate level. Throughout her career, she does a lot of things around historical societies, historical commissions. She's doing work with the Mashpee Native folk preservation. She also is helping with preserving her grandfather's history with the Black Archives, who was the first black printer admitted into the Printers Union. And then lastly, with the National Urban League, the National Urban League had a publishing company where Anthony Hill sought to help publish one of the first comic books on Negro history, which is the image that you see on the screen right there, by Matthew Henson. And she also was very critical in understanding how we could preserve his history. And to me, that really impacted the way in which I'm thinking about myself. Earlier, we spoke about archiving our history and what that means for this generation and what people are doing currently to archive what it is that what their journey is in their lives currently. And I think Anthony Hill helped me in this opportunity, helped me to think about what that means for me and my colleagues, my peers, etc. I would like to end by saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of the Library of Congress. It's been astounding. I've learned a lot. And to my mentors, y'all have been very, very critical to my development and thinking about archiving. And I want to say thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Peng Duong, and she'll be speaking on behalf of the Manuscript Division. Thank you again.
Welcome, everyone. Through this new collaborative internship between the library and Howard University, IFE helped the Manuscript Division analyze, arrange, conserve, and describe the papers of Anne Tannehill. Working with IFE on the Tannehill papers taught me that activism and leadership come in different forms and happens on different fronts. There are those who stand on the front lines, and then there are those, like Anne Tannehill, who work behind the scenes to move the movement forward. Because of this internship, researchers can now use, learn from, and be inspired by the Anne Tannehill papers. And for all 3 interns, I want you to know that you helped advance the library's mission to preserve human knowledge, American history, and the spirit of American determination, perseverance, and resilience. To all the supporters, thank you for furthering the progress of American. Thank you for furthering the progress of knowledge and helping to preserve history for future generations. Next up is my co-mentor from the Manuscript Division, Meg McAleer.
Hi, good morning. When I introduce myself as an archivist, I always have to follow it with an analogy to ward off those blank stares that you get. So what I usually say is that it's a lot like being an archaeologist, except we dig in paper instead of in dirt. But I'm changing my analogy. Archivists are conversation starters. When we do our job well, conversations absolutely explode as scholars and exhibit goers and the merely curious interact with our collections. But in order to do our job well, we need to open ourselves up to conversation at every phase of our work. We need to invite young historians in to challenge our assumptions and open us up to new possibilities. And Ife, you did this for us. And we listened deeply. So what I very much hope, and what Peng hopes, is that this is only the opening act to what will be a very long conversation between us, and we thank you a lot. And now I'd like to actually introduce a dear friend who is also the program manager for this internship, Linda Marinas.
So actually, I'm not going to stand here very long because we don't have too much time before we enjoy a bite to eat and a cup of coffee or tea and have a chance to meet one another informally. But I just wanted to recap very quickly and thank Jackie for her presentation, Jacqueline, her presentation about Ailey and that I learned about how he remained open to hit the creative process throughout the various stages of his innovation, and that she learned to appreciate that different materials, such as paper-based sheets of paper and moving images and audio, are treated so differently, and why they're treated differently to preserve them here at the library and other cultural heritage institutions. From Brittany, she talked a little bit about preservation as well when she was rehousing collections, and she learned how rehousing a collection helps to preserve it from fading and tearing, and so that researchers can handle the actual original materials safely in our various reading rooms, and that archival relationships when creating a guide for researchers listing what is in a container of records or papers, that it's important to document the teachers, the mentors that came before that individual artist, so that not only the artist's work, but the context for that artist's work is available to the researcher. And then finally, Ife, that I liked that you said you learned about what reading means to a scholar, and that is understanding the underlying way in which a collection is compiled, so that as a researcher, you are informed about how to go about scholarly work in a collection. And the importance, of course, and the contribution of Anne Tannehill. And as Meg said, actually it was Peng who expressed how activism can take place well behind the scenes as well as on the forefront of the stage. So thank you for your presentations, and I wanted to say that it was personally very gratifying to get to know you and work with you, and I hope I see you in our reading rooms in the future. Thank you very, very much, and to the mentors and the divisions who sponsored these interns. And to Mr. and Mrs. Welburn, who made the stipends for their internship possible. Thank you all very, very much. Have a bite to eat, a cup of coffee, or a cup of tea.